The deadliest skydiving disaster in Lake Erie. Imagine this: you're falling through the sky at 20,000 feet, adrenaline pumping through your veins. You've done this hundreds of times before. But when you break through the clouds, instead of seeing solid ground below you, all you see is water. Deep, dark water stretching endlessly in every direction. This is the terrifying reality that 18 experienced skydivers faced on August 27, 1967, in what would become known as the Lake Erie disaster. By the time it was over, 16 people would be dead, and the 2 survivors would tell a story that sent chills down everyone's spine. Lake Erie sits in northern Ohio, the 4th largest lake in North America and the 11th largest in the world. About 8 miles south of the lake, there's a small airfield called Portner Airport. On this particular Sunday afternoon, 30 skydivers showed up at this tiny airport, buzzing with excitement. Why? They'd been offered something incredible: a free skydiving flight from a modified World War II B-25 bomber. This wasn't just any jump. This was a chance to leap from a piece of flying history. But here's where things get interesting. As the skydivers started boarding the aircraft, the pilot realized they had a serious problem. The B-25 bomber simply couldn't safely carry all 30 people. The weight would be too much. So right there, the pilot made a difficult decision. Only 20 divers would go up, and he'd select them based on experience and skill level. 10 disappointed skydivers had to stay behind. They had no idea that this rejection would save their lives. The plan seemed straightforward enough. The B-25 would take off from Portner Airport, spiral upward to 20,000 feet, circle back over the airport, and drop 18 divers. Then it would climb even higher to 30,000 feet and release the final 2. Everyone would parachute back down to Portner Airport. Simple, right? There was just one problem: the weather was terrible. Bad weather delayed the morning takeoff, but by 3 in the afternoon, conditions improved just enough. The B-25 roared down the runway and lifted into the cloudy Ohio sky. Inside, 20 skydivers sat shoulder to shoulder, hearts racing. For most of them, this was their first time jumping from a bomber. The excitement was electric. They had no clue they were about to become part of aviation history for all the wrong reasons. A smaller Cessna 180 also took off that day, tasked with flying at 12,000 feet to photograph the skydivers as they jumped. Remember, this was 1967. There was no GPS technology, no smartphones, no satellite tracking. When the weather was bad, pilots had to rely entirely on radio communication with air traffic control towers to know where they were. And this is where everything started to go horribly, fatally wrong. For an hour, the B-25 spiraled upward through thick clouds, the temperature inside the cabin dropping steadily. By the time they reached 20,000 feet, it was negative 30 degrees Celsius outside. The skydivers had prepared for this, wearing extra layers of jumpsuits to protect against the brutal cold. The pilot radioed air traffic control and asked for their location. The controller told them they were about 6 miles from Portner Airport. Perfect. They were almost over the drop zone. 1 minute later, the Cessna pilot also radioed in. He couldn't see the B-25 through the clouds and needed to know where it was so he could position himself to take photographs. Air traffic control told him he was 6 miles behind the B-25. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. A few minutes later, the B-25 pilot radioed again. This time, the controller gave him the green light. "You're directly over Portner Airport." That was the signal. The pilot turned to the 18 skydivers and gave them the thumbs up. Time to jump. The tiny mistake that would kill 16 people had already been made. But nobody knew it yet. At 20,000 feet, with temperatures well below freezing, 18 experienced skydivers launched themselves into the void. They jumped together, planning to form formations during the freefall before deploying their parachutes. Below them, all they could see was a thick blanket of clouds. According to the plan, they'd fall through those clouds and see Portner Airport waiting below. They were supposed to deploy their chutes after breaking through the cloud layer. As they plummeted through the freezing air, adrenaline and excitement overwhelmed any sense of fear. This was what they lived for. But when they burst through the clouds at about 3,000 feet, their excitement turned to pure terror in an instant. There was no airport below them, no runway, no solid ground at all. Instead, stretching out in every direction as far as they could see, was the dark, cold water of Lake Erie. They weren't over land. They were over the middle of a massive lake. Panic set in immediately. At 3,000 feet, they had seconds to react. Every single skydiver deployed their parachutes, desperately hoping they could drift toward the shoreline. But it was useless. When they splashed down into the icy water, they were at least 6 miles from land. 6 miles of open water between them and safety. Here's what they thought would happen: hit the water, quickly release the parachute harness, and swim until rescue arrived. But the thick layers of warm clothing they'd worn to survive the altitude became death traps in the water. Swimming was nearly impossible. Staying afloat was nearly impossible. Only 2 skydivers survived, and their survival came down to one critical decision. Before hitting the water, they'd managed to strip off their boots and some of the excess gear. Those few pounds made all the difference. They managed to stay afloat long enough to be rescued. The other 16 weren't so lucky. Their bodies weren't recovered for days. The last victim was pulled from Lake Erie a full week after the disaster. 16 didn't make it, 2 survived. But their story is far from over.